What's going on, guys, and welcome to another Doctor Who ranking video. Today I'll be ranking every story from season 12 of the classic series. This is Tom Baker's first season as the 4th Doctor, who would go on to be the actor to play the role for the longest period to date. This is generally a highly regarded season, which still feels a little bit like the 3rd Doctor's era, but you can start to see key changes that would define this era. This is the last season to contain 5 stories, which had been the norm since season 8. Anyway, without further ado, remember that this is my own personal ranking, so these are my opinions, but I'd love to hear yours in the comments below. Let's get started. Number 5. Revenge of the Cybermen. Cybermen return for the first time since 1968, and to be honest, it's a bit of a mixed bag. This episode gets heavily criticised for many reasons, and for the most part I agree. However, I don't dislike it as much as some others. The Doctor, Sarah and Harry find themselves on a space station where an ancient battle between humans and Cybermen is raging on. This space station is orbiting the planet Voga, a planet made of gold, where its inhabitants, the Vogans, also get involved. Some things I really like about this story are the updated Cybermats. It's great to see them again, and their updated design looks pretty good. The Doctor defeats the Cybermen by using a Cybermat against them in the end, which I thought was pretty cool. The seal of Rassilon is seen for the first time in this story too, with the Vogans wearing it on their clothing. I don't think it's ever mentioned why they used the seal, as this was actually something they just decided to reuse in later stories because they liked the design. I like to think there's some reason why they have the seal of Rassilon though, but we'll probably never know. This story also has the iconic line from the Doctor, "Harry Sullivan is an imbecile." Just thought I'd mention that because it's a very funny moment. Unfortunately, there are a few bad points to this story though. Some of the Vogans' masks look pretty terrible. Not all of them, but there are a few that look really bad. The Cybermen's voices also feel like a bit of a downgrade here. They aren't anywhere near robotic enough, and although you can have Cyberman voices too robotic, here they just sound too human and somewhat emotional. Probably the biggest issue with this story though is the reveal that these Cybermen are deadly allergic to gold. Now, it's good to have a specific thing that Cybermen can be defeated by, but in this instance it just makes them out to be a bit crap when they are literally surrounded by a planet made of gold. It also starts a trend of the Cybermen getting defeated by gold in silly and unsatisfying ways that would eventually be at its worst in Season 25's Silver Nemesis. Altogether though, I actually quite enjoy this story, and if you can put those negatives aside, it's a decent 4-part story to watch. Number 4. Robots. We now head to the first episode of this season, and the first for the 4th Doctor. This story sees the newly regenerated Doctor, Sarah and Unit fight a robot built by Professor Kettlewell that is being ordered to act against its prime directive. The robot constructs a disintegrator gun and starts causing havoc, being able to change size to be giant and kill anyone in its path. Tom Baker is amazing in his first story here. The wackiness of his Doctor, from skipping with Harry to trying on ridiculous outfits, is hilarious. He cements himself in the role straight away, and although he feels a bit out of place in the Unit setting compared to Jon Pertwee, he makes it work. The K1 robot itself I really like the look of. It's a futuristic robot that looks menacing, and I certainly wouldn't want to get in its way. Despite the effects not being great when it grows in size, I still think it's cool and works well within the story. The way they destroy the robot with the Professor's chemical concoction is satisfying and makes you feel sorry for the Professor when he's killed by the robot, but happy that he was able to help destroy it even after his death. My issues with this story aren't that substantial, but I still do have a couple. Firstly, Professor Kettlewell wasn't necessarily a good guy from the start, and I think after we learn about all the bad things he's done, it doesn't feel satisfying or deserved when he starts working with the good guys. The robot fainting after killing the Professor seemed a bit random to me and didn't make a whole lot of sense. Yes, they're obviously close because he was created by the Professor, but to me something about it just seemed off. The robot's scale can be off a bit at times. Depending on what angle we're looking from, it either looks 10 feet tall or 50 feet tall. Unfortunately, it takes me out of it when the size and scale just doesn't make sense from shot to shot. The only other thing that isn't really a negative, but just a point to make, is that this almost feels more like a 3rd Doctor story than a 4th Doctor story. The Earth location, unit and general feel doesn't work with this Doctor quite so well, but thankfully after this, the 4th Doctor gets his own unique style of stories. Other than those small issues though, this is a good start to this season. Number 3. The Sontaran Experiment. This is an interesting one as it's only a two-parter, something we hadn't seen since the first Doctor's era. It's also the second time we get to see the Sontarans. The Doctor, Sarah and Harry land on Earth in the far future where a Sontaran is hunting down a group of colonists. They have to stop this Sontaran or the future of mankind will be at risk. This story is very much a filler episode in the series as they didn't have the budget, episode slots or time for another big adventure. These points show as it's a very restricted story with a small cast, however it's quite enjoyable because of its fast pacing. Sontaran Steyr doing experiments on humans to plan an attack is an interesting concept, and I liked seeing some of these experiments being tested like the hallucinations device used on Sarah. The sword fight between Steyr and the Doctor at the end is pretty epic, although you can definitely tell that Tom has injured his arm. As for bad things, I'm not the biggest fan of how Steyr is killed with his head deflating like a balloon. I'm not sure why he dies in this way and it just looks a bit ridiculous. Also, even though I like this being 2 parts long and the pacing is good because of it, it would have been nice to look at the experiments a bit more and have some more interesting things happen with the colonists by adding an extra part or two. Otherwise though, this is an easy and quick story to get through and is enjoyable. Number 2. The Ark in Space. The Doctor, Sarah and Harry land on a space station orbiting Earth and find thousands of humans in cryogenic sleep. While they've been asleep, a parasitic insect race called the Wirren have taken control of the base and threatened the future of mankind. We found out later in Revenge of the Cybermen that the space stations from these stories are the same but in different times. This story has plenty of good things going for it. To start with, we actually see the sonic screwdriver being used to unscrew screws, which sounds silly but is something we don't see very often. The Doctor and Harry moving around with a table on top of them to avoid being shot by a robot is rather funny. This story features the iconic Homo sapiens speech from the Doctor, the first of many great speeches from this era, and as usual, it's delivered perfectly by Tom Baker, although the way he says Homo sapiens is a bit strange. Maybe it's just how they say it on Gallifrey. Another funny moment is when the Doctor insults Sarah, saying she's useless because she can't crawl through the vent, which eggs her on and makes her push through and do it. The Doctor's smile and Sarah's reaction afterwards are great and shows the chemistry between these two, the chemistry these two have so early on in their partnership. The main negatives for this episode are the physical effects and props used for the infection and the Wirren itself. The infection is literally just some green bubble wrap stuck onto people's bodies that increasingly covers more of their body until they're fully infected. It's so obvious that it's bubble wrap and makes it look really tacky and cheap. The Wirren itself is also one of the more obvious man-in-a-suit aliens in the series. The static way it moves around and even its voice not being that distorted or edited with effects makes it not very threatening in most cases. I feel this one does take a little while to get going as well, however. The second half of the story is better paced. All in all though, this is a very good story. You just have to use your imagination a bit with the effects. Number 1. Genesis of the Daleks. To probably no surprise to anyone, Genesis takes victory in this season's ranking. The Time Lords send the Doctor to Skaro to destroy the Daleks before they've been created, knowing what a threat to the universe they will become. The Doctor doesn't have any say in this, but once he gets to the point where he can destroy them, he just can't do it. This story famously introduces Davros, creator of the Daleks, who would appear in every Dalek story of the classic series after this point. The fact that we get the backstory as to why the Daleks were created is great. The Kaleds, the original race that would go on to create the Daleks, are at war with the Thals, and this is their initial reason for creating the Daleks. They want to win the war, and a living killing machine is the answer. We see Davros testing the Dalek gun in a chilling scene. The scientist explaining how the Dalek mutants are created is fascinating. This scientist later on has second thoughts about the Daleks and realizes how evil and destructive they can be. Of course, the Doctor and Davros' talks are amazing, and the chemistry and acting between the two of them is sublime. All capped off with possibly the most famous speech of all Doctor Who, with the "Do I have the right" speech from the Doctor. He can't push himself to cause a genocide, even though he knows how evil the Daleks will become. It ends with the Daleks killing Davros, as even though he created them, he is not a pure Dalek. The only issue at all with this story is that at 6 parts long, it can be rather slow at times. However, even though there's lots of talking and chatting, it's all fascinating information and does a brilliant job of showing how the Daleks were created. This story is near perfection and is considered one of the best Doctor Who stories for good reason. There we have it. That's my ranking of all 5 stories from Season 12 of classic Doctor Who. Please let me know in the comments how you'd rank these stories and tell me what seasons you'd like to see me rank next. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, please go ahead, like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.